So again, thank you all for being here today. I have a few housekeeping notes and then I'll turn it over. So for those of you that are new to the Citizen Science Association, the CSA is a member-driven organization that connects people from a wide range of experiences around a shared purpose of advancing knowledge through research and monitoring done by, for, and with members of the public. Our efforts are concentrated into a biennial conference and virtual event series, peer-reviewed journal, and member services such as our working groups, online networking, and webinars like these. Our membership represents a multidisciplinary and multidimensional nature of the field and includes practitioners, researchers, educators, community leaders, and more. From all of our members, we hear that CSA is a community to call home, a place where you'll be welcomed and encouraged to engage in cross-cutting conversations that you won't find in any other organization. We recently launched a new engagement site called CSA Connect that we're really excited about. It's pictured here to facilitate more networking and connection for CSA members and invited guests. And some of the guests that will be getting access to CSA Connect are those who are attending CSI Virtual. This year, we're premiering a new event series that we're calling CSI Virtual. Events scheduled throughout the month of May will engage hundreds of citizen science practitioners from across the globe in sharing ideas of innovation that make our field thrive. Events will include keynotes to inspire, workshops to learn, poster sessions to connect, as well as live engagement sessions and networking events. Registration is going to open later this week, and I'll include a link in the chat in a moment for how to get on our mailing list to find out more about that. This webinar was coordinated by our Law and Policy Working Group. CSA has 9 working groups that explore cross-cutting issues like data and metadata, valuation, ethics, and more. Our working groups are one of the key ways that we work to advance the goals of the CSA through the sharing of resources, best practices, and relevant information, both among group members and also to the broader citizen science community. Our working groups are a great place to look for connections or dig deeper into topical areas. We have details on our website. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to a YouTube playlist later this week. We have a growing number of webinar recordings available there, including many from our Law and Policy Working Group. You can check them out on our YouTube page. That's also linked on our website. All of our webinars are led by experts in the field whose opinions may or may not reflect the association as a whole. CSA appreciates the time and contributions of speakers volunteering to take part in these webinars and the questions and input from you, our attendees. So if you do have questions, we would encourage you to direct them to the Q&A tool, which is at the bottom of your screen. You'll look for a box that says Q&A here. If you want to now, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us what organization you're affiliated with, where you're calling in from in the chat. If you have comments or just want to chat with folks, you can use the chat. Just make sure that you set the blue 2 box to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your response. The default when we're in a webinar mode is to all panelists. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Leah Shanley, Senior Fellow at the Nelson Institute at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she'll introduce our panelists today.
Thank you, Rihanna, for that great introduction. And I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am now the Executive Director of the International Computer Science Institute and would love to hear from folks. I've put my personal email in the chat box if people would like to connect. I'm one of 2 co-chairs of the CSA's Law and Policy Working Group. My other co-chair, George Wyeth, is also on the call today. You can see him in the chat box. So please reach out to both of us. We meet the first Thursday of every month. We also have webinars and everybody is welcome. So if you'd like to get on that mailing list with us and join our group, or just be passive observer and getting the mailings on what we're working on, we'd love to have you. We focus both on the law and policy issues about citizen science. That includes things like we're talking about today in strategies for building institutional support within government, but also the policy implications of citizen science. In particular, we've been focused on environmental justice and social justice issues and how citizen science might inform policy around that. Couple of other things, we've got a workshop that's been approved for the CSA annual conference. We'll be focusing on doing trainings for how citizen scientists can engage with government in the public comment periods or public comment or briefing opportunities. Another thing to look out for is the Citizen Science Global Partnership has had some policy activity, particularly around the UN Environment Assembly, UNEA 5, and there'll be more to come on that. So again, if you're interested, please reach out to George and myself. I'd like to welcome today two of my favorite colleagues from NOAA, innovators and leaders in this space. They were there with us in the early days of setting up the Federal Community of Practice and building the toolkits and the Holdren memo. And so I'm really excited to see they're one of the first agencies to have a very forward-thinking, cutting-edge strategy for how citizen science can advance the mission of government and better serve the American people. So with that, I'd like to introduce John McLaughlin. He's the Education Program Manager with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in their Office of Education. He serves as a program officer for grant awards through NOAA's Environmental Literacy Program and is a co-coordinator of the citizen science efforts across the agency. He also has served as a co-chair of the Federal Community of Practice for Citizen Science and Crowdsourcing, and has also worked on the GLOBE program previously. Laura Oremland, sorry, is an education program manager with NOAA Fisheries Office of Science and Technology in Silver Spring, Maryland. And in this role, she manages a higher education program, Quest, designed to train the next generation of fishery scientists with quantitative-based skill sets. She also serves as one of NOAA's citizen science co-coordinators and co-chair of the NOAA Fisheries Citizen Science Subcommittee. Woo, love it. And she's been with NOAA since 2002, where she was a Knaus Fellow, Go Fellows. I also noticed there was a new paper out on the citizen science and fisheries that I just came across the listserv or through my Google. So maybe Laura, you can mention that as well. I think that stems from some of the work you've been doing as I recall. So very exciting. With that, I'll hand it over to John and Laura. Oh, and lastly, logistics. If you have questions, enter them in the Q&A question box. It's the icon at the bottom of your screen. You can chit chat in the chat panel, but any questions for the panelists, please put into the Q&A box. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you for having us here today. I see a lot of familiar names, and I see my co-authors, Rick Bonney, Lita Cunningham, Julie Bird, and I think Jennifer Shirk also on the line from that bioscience paper, which was about how citizen science can inform fisheries management. But with that, I'll kick today's presentation off on our NOAA citizen science and in particular, our new strategy. We've already done the introduction, so next slide, please, and I'll kick it over to John.
Thanks so much, Laura. We want to talk about what our organization, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA by the acronym, is. And first off, it's a US government agency that is part of the Department of Commerce. It has a mission focused on science, service, and stewardship, which is to understand and predict changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coasts, to share that knowledge and information with others, and to conserve and manage coastal and marine ecosystems and resources. And we want to just thank you all for the interest in our strategy, thank the Law and Policy Working Group, and as you'll see, citizen science plays a key role in helping us meet our mission. So next slide, please.
So who are citizen scientists at NOAA? Citizen scientists can be anybody. They can be elementary school students who support the GLOBE program and collect environmental measurements for them, or they can even be former presidents, like this picture here showing of President George Herbert Walker Bush, who became a citizen scientist when he recaptured a tagged striped bass in June 1999 off of Kennebunkport, Maine. The recapture was reported by one of his Secret Service agents, and he actually kept in touch with the gentleman who had tagged the striped bass just 3 months earlier. Today, we want to talk about citizen science at NOAA, and looking ahead, we hope to drive innovation and support NOAA science by harnessing the power of the crowd. Next slide. So a brief outline of what we're going to cover today. We want to kind of give it a broad overview of citizen science at NOAA, dig into some example projects, and then really show the roadmap that we've laid ahead for the NOAA citizen science strategy. Next slide. So we'd be remiss if we didn't start out, and how does NOAA perceive citizen science? How do we define it? And the core definition that we tend to follow here is from the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act. which simply refers to individuals or groups who voluntarily participate in one or more aspects of the scientific process. Again, it could be collecting data, it could be actually, but we also want to remind people it's formulating the research questions, analyzing the data as well. Next slide. But also, just a reminder, citizen science can go by other names like community science or volunteer monitoring or public participation in scientific research. And when we get to this NOAA citizen science strategy, we've used the broad term citizen science to cover crowdsourcing as well as prize and challenges. And we try to lay that out in the strategy. Next slide. Now I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Laura. As you all are aware, citizen science is not a new field. Historically, citizen scientists often played the role of hands-on data observers. Within NOAA, the Cooperative Observer Program, volunteers have been observing weather and likewise climate since the program was created in 1890, in the 1890s. These hands-on contributions were and still are remarkably valuable in the story they tell. This historical picture of a Cooperative Observer volunteer on the left can be seen what I believe is likely writing observations down on a data sheet. About a decade ago, smartphones began to revolutionize how data are collected for projects and reported. These devices allow the ability to track location, report photos, cardinal direction, and NOAA, there's even a known program that takes advantage of the magnetometer data. And they can be reported near instantaneously. Developments in low-cost sensors that can be paired with phones are only increasing the observations that can be done in the future. And so we're excited to continue to track that growth. We're also excited about the explosion in online projects that empower volunteers to do tasks such as analyzing imagery, videos, data sets, audio files from the comfort of their own homes. And these can aid people with mobility issues in participating in citizen science. On the right-hand side here, you can see a project, Cyclone Center, that used image recognition power of the human brain by having volunteers answer questions about what they were seeing in 1 million satellite images to classify the intensity of the tropical storms shown within those images. Since I started working with citizen science 20 years ago, it has been remarkable to see this amazing growth in opportunities available. But I do think it likely pales in comparison to what the next decade holds. Next slide, please. And I want to talk about the growth in the field that all this has resulted in. In 2012, an NSF program officer, David Hanich, described the coming growth in the field as a coming tsunami. And when you look at metrics such as this one of the keyword citizen science on the Web of Science, you see that amazing growth happening within the field. And this growth is part of why our agency continues to have so much interest in citizen science. Next slide, please, and I'll turn things over to Laura. Laura, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks, John. So where does citizen science fit at NOAA? One of the things we want to emphasize is that it's an integral component to both our NOAA education and our research enterprise. It's certainly not new to our research. Many of our programs from weather to fisheries have come to rely on some of the data to help support our basic science enterprise. And it also is a tool that can be used to support STEM education at NOAA. We have a growing community of over 200 in a community of practice at citizen science at NOAA. And we also had our science advisory board, an external board of science advisors to NOAA, who took a deeper dive into citizen science and how it could be used to better address our ecosystem science. And one of the things, they had a number of recommendations, but one of them was that it was an underutilized tool for environmental data collection. Their final conclusion was to expand citizen science at NOAA from outreach and education to a recognized and supported component of research. Following on the heels of that, we saw some growing momentum of citizen science, and NOAA Citizen Science was named a science and just a handful, 6 science and technology focus areas by our NOAA Research Council in January of 2020. And finally, we worked on a NOAA Citizen Science strategy, which we're going to talk more about, that came out this past January of 2021. Next slide. And I'll turn it back to John.
Thanks, Lara. I'd like to zoom in on these science and technology focus areas. And I just put the link in the chat to where you can find these strategies, including our NOAA citizen science strategy. And you'll see NOAA focus areas, in addition to citizen science, include uncrewed systems, data, artificial intelligence, cloud, and omics. And we're at an exciting time because the representatives of these areas and these focus areas are starting to meet regularly and engage in conversations about all the ways this work is mutually complementary and ways we can better collaborate. So the work we're doing in citizen science is more strongly connected to the work in these other emerging areas. I have to say, it's extremely exciting for me to have the seat here at the table. When we started coordinating citizen science at NOAA back in 2013, there was a lot of skepticism about the scientific integrity that these projects brought and the impact they were having. And we've gone from that point to having the strategy was signed off by our administrator, our deputy administrator, and the leaders of all our line offices. So to be one of the 6 focus areas of the agency and working with these other emerging technologies is an exciting position to be in. Next slide, please. And why are we here? Well, citizen science projects, as you likely know, can have many impacts, which makes them extremely powerful. Citizen science can enhance scientific research and monitoring. It can provide hands-on learning and increase STEM literacy, science, technology, engineering, and math. And it can also help address societal needs. And the one thing we've really been learning and zeroing in on with our agency is how these are not exclusive. You don't have to choose one to focus on. Rather, they can be mutually reinforcing. And the 2018 report, Learning Through Citizen Science from the National Academy of Sciences, does an excellent job of laying this out and describing how if you increase the STEM literacy of your participants, you may end up more likely to have scientific discoveries, and vice versa. If you have unique scientific discoveries, you're more likely to engage volunteers and increase their STEM literacy. Next slide, please. I'll turn things over to Laura.
Yeah, so what are the impacts of citizen science at NOAA? And we were fortunate to have a student who helped us analyze this just from a snapshot of 2019. And looking at, we've tried to survey our projects and about 25 of them responded. So based on their responses, here's what we learned for 2019 projects alone. We had over 550,000 volunteers who provided over support of over 1.1 million hours and 16 million observations. And over the majority of them were started in just in the past 10 years. As one scientist astutely observed, the ocean wasn't closed by the pandemic. So looking at our projects, we have 60 projects currently listed on citizenscience.gov, and the majority of them rely on partnerships from private industry to academia to NGOs to K-12 schools. And during this pandemic, as I mentioned, the ocean being wide open for scientific observations, we've had record participation, many showing increases during the pandemic. In this infographic here, which shows an underwater herring camera in Plymouth, Massachusetts, this lets citizen scientists help collect data on the annual spring migration of river herring as they return to an area where NOAA and partners work to remove or modify 6 dams. So from the safety of their own homes, the public can watch and count fish from this, and the data is used to estimate the total number of river herring that are migrating upstream. And this project, which began in 2019 and continued in 2020, saw over 10 times the amount of participation. Citizen science counts were around over 25,000 compared to 2,000 or a little over 2,000 in 2019. So, and again, we also show another citizen science projects. We're looking at a program called the Cooperative Shark Tagging Program, which has been around since 1962. Commercial fishers and recreational anglers recaptured sharks showed an increase of over 25% over the last years based solely on email and online reporting. So the impacts, period over time and even during the pandemic have been substantial for NOAA. Next slide. So now what we want to do is try to take it to or give some examples of some of our projects here at NOAA. And what I'm going to start with is a project that's been online now for a little less than a year called Oceanize, which is on Zooniverse. Allows folks to serve as marine biologists for NOAA from the comforts of their own home, whether they're in Iowa or in Hawaii. So in this project, what this project is designed to do is to help volunteers increase knowledge about Hawaiian deep sea bottomfish. Bottomfish are some of Hawaii's most economically and culturally valuable fish species. The volunteers annotate hundreds of thousands of images taken by underwater cameras, and they record species type and abundance. This information is used to help train new machine learning algorithms and help recognize these fish in video, which helps save researchers valuable time and how it allows them to look at new methods for turning pictures into numbers. And less than a year in, nearly 7,000 volunteers have completed approximately 1 million classifications across over 100,000 images. And the hope is that this data can be used to continually improve the bottomfish stock assessments. Next slide. Turn it back to John here.
Thanks, Laura. And I just tried out the URLs for Oceanize and for the next project we want to discuss, which is the Long-Term Monitoring Program and Experiential Training for Students, or LiMPETS. And this is a project that can have more than one impact and does have more than one impact, as we described earlier. And LiMPETS engages over 600 teachers and students to collect rocky intertidal and sandy beach data at California National Marine Sanctuaries. These data have informed sanctuary condition reports and helped establish a baseline of key indicator species for the new system of California marine protected areas. But they've also had an impact on the students they reach. The two lines here show first in blue the change in student interest in science, and the red change in interest in science as a career path. So we're excited to see the impact this project is having on those who participate in it. Next slide, please. I'd like to pause here and ask you a question. And this question is to imagine a warm summer day at noontime and think about a city, in this case specifically the city I'm currently in, Washington, D.C., and think about how much the temperature, air temperature, in degrees Fahrenheit may vary throughout the city at the same time on a hot summer afternoon. And please put your answers in the chat. So again, chat how many degrees you think the temperature might vary at the same time of day on a hot summer afternoon in Washington, D.C. All right, I'm seeing 8 degrees, 23, 20, 25, 12, 15, 15, 15. Wow, 15. Okay, people are really zeroing in on 15, 12. Excellent. Well, you are very astute in terms of urban temperatures. Next slide, please. So the answer to this question comes from a citizen science project called Urban Heat Island Mapping Campaign that NOAA supported in 2018 that found a range of temperatures from 85 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit across the district at the same time of day. So that is a temperature difference of 17 degrees Fahrenheit. So thank you all for your great guesses. You're all extremely close. What makes this delta significant is it highlights major environmental justice implications. As the coolest spots, seen here along Rock Creek Park in kind of that northernmost blue area and along the Potomac River, tend to be the most affluent areas, while the hotter places, often near transportation corridors, tend to be more affordable housing areas. The resolution of the resulting maps allow us to come up with location-based solutions and allows communities to use this data in their planning decisions. Look at, say, increasing canopy cover, alternative surfaces, or cooling stations. The Washington, D.C. Department of Energy and the Environment has said they use these data in planning decisions. The project model was used in an award our office made to the Science Museum of Virginia, which ran a mapping campaign in Richmond, Virginia. The resulting maps of current heat disparities correlate strongly with the maps of redlining that occurred in that city. Since local communities were involved from the start in that project, they feel ownership of those data. Community groups have used these maps in their meetings to discuss best practices of public lands. And I will chat out a link to where you can learn more about how this work is funded by NOAA's Climate Program Office. And next slide, please.
So now we're going to take a deep dive into the NOAA Citizen Science Strategy. This strategy was informed widely by the NOAA community as well as a public comment period. We've received public comments from citizen scientists themselves for NOAA projects, to federal agencies, to the private sector, to NGOs, and a lot of them really did help shape the strategy from where it started. So we thank, if anybody took the time to comment on this call, we thank you for the valuable input you provided. The document was finalized in January 2021, and it provides a roadmap for where we'd like to take citizen science at NOAA. What we're currently working on is basically an action plan. How are we going to implement the goals of this strategy? And we also want to emphasize that the strategy does include prize competitions and how we can increase that capacity at NOAA. Next slide. So I want to put forward here what our vision statement is in this document. I'm just going to read it. NOAA supports opportunities for the public to engage with the agency's mission and to address societal needs through science, technology, and innovation. So we wanted to show that it can support our science enterprise as well as education. Next slide. We have 5 core goals, an overarching view, and we're going to dive a little deeper into each of them, but focusing on coordination, integrating citizen science into NOAA, focusing on data quality, partnerships as a core element, as well as proficiency and training to use it appropriately. Next slide. So the first goal really focuses on coordination and support. How can we emphasize best practices and have an overarching coordination mechanism at NOAA? I've listed here in short form some of the objectives that are associated with it. But really what we wanted to demonstrate in this goal is to show that citizen science is a viable tool to help NOAA research and other mission critical activities. And we also aim to develop metrics and processes so that we can track citizen science, their projects, and the impacts. Next slide. Next, we want to show how can we better integrate citizen science into business as usual at NOAA. Certainly not something that would replace our core science, but something that could be used to supplement it. And again, through some of the objectives I've listed here, I've bolded the 2 that I want to focus on most. And some of this came from some valuable comments received in the public comment period, but really to show and really to emphasize how participants can not just be data collectors, but can play a role in project development, as well as to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion are considered in project design. Next slide, please. The data quality and accessibility, I think, hits on some of the themes that our Science Advisory Board and others have touched on. But one of the main emphasis here is to make sure that when citizen science is, NOAA is affiliated with a citizen science project, how do we ensure that we're representing the NOAA brand as an objective, trusted source of information? And, besides trying to provide strategies and templates and guidance so that people can design projects with scientific quality and data credibility in mind, one of the core goals is to ensure appropriate data fitness for use. Something that's going to be used for regulatory purposes is going to have far different goals and requirements than something that may be used as a public education tool. Next slide. And here in partnerships, I can't emphasize enough, I'd be hard pressed to identify a NOAA citizen science project that doesn't have some core partner outside the agency or rely on those synergies to make the project continue and successful. But we want to do better. We want to strengthen our intergovernmental partnerships through our federal community of practice and other mechanisms. We want to develop new partnerships. We want to take a step further to identify new partners that could help, enhance and build upon existing projects or new projects. And we also want to make sure we're doing sufficient outreach within our agency to build those partnerships as well. Next slide. And finally, training. We want to make sure that if somebody is new to citizen science, they have the training to develop a project that can have meaningful data quality, that can follow the best practices that this community here is working actively to develop. So we want to aim to provide training to guide the appropriate application and work internally and externally to try to set up training mechanisms for our staff to support citizen science development and project management. Next slide. And I'll turn it back to John.
Thanks, Laura. So Laura mentioned that our strategy also includes support for prize challenges. And we do have a history of prize challenges within NOAA, a growing use of these challenges. I chatted out the link to the 3 challenges that are shown here on this slide. The right whale recognition competition, which was run to automate the right whale recognition process using a data set of aerial photographs. The Rodeo 2 challenge, which was run by NOAA in partnership with the Bureau of Reclamation to create algorithms that allow longer term forecasting of drought and wet periods to reduce the risk to our water systems. The Develop competition, which is run with NOAA and the Department of Energy to challenge innovators to integrate marine renewable energy with ocean observation platforms. We're proud of this growing history, but it is not quite the same established history that we have with citizen science within NOAA. And we are looking to grow the use of prizes and challenges as we feel they offer a lot of ways to create innovative solutions to the challenges our agency faces. And we look at the work on challenge.gov, which represents prizes and challenges from throughout the federal government. And we are looking at ways that we can increase our capacity within NOAA. So next slide, please. This brings us to our future direction and ways we continue to refine and improve our work. As Laura mentioned, our main focus of our work right now is identifying the actions to implement our strategy. We feel the strategy is going to be our roadmap forward. We appreciate all the feedback from within NOAA and externally from many of you in helping us guide the strategy and giving us a way forward. And as you can see within the strategy, it's really important for us to ensure that all projects uphold the integrity of the NOAA brand. As the number of projects continue to increase within our agency and the ability to create a project has in some ways become easier as new templates and technologies become available, we want to make sure that scientific integrity is always up front and center, and also that the ways our projects interact with communities and volunteers are also appropriate and in line with best practices. One thing our projects, we note about our projects is the majority of them are using a contributory model. When we collected data on our projects this summer, that was well reflected in that data. However, we're very excited about collaborative and co-created project models that allow greater integration of community input into project design. Research has shown that these type of projects can often engage communities that may not otherwise be involved in the scientific process. So we are looking at how we can have more co-created and collaborative projects simulated within our agency. And as I previously mentioned, increasing the prize capacity, looking at how we connect prize challenges in with our existing citizen science work are also main focuses of our work. As Laura mentioned, all of our work happens in partnership, and you see that reflected as one of the 5 goals within our strategy. So I want to take a minute to thank all of you for being partners on this work, and all of you who are volunteers with NOAA or other citizen science projects. Thank you so much for taking the time and showing the interest to work with us as we learn more about the world around us. With that said, next slide. I will end just by saying we're proud of how our agency has embraced mutually beneficial relationships with citizen scientists, and we're excited for how much more can be done in the future and how we can do it even better. And we, as part of that, we look forward to any questions or thoughts you may have about the work we just described.
Wonderful. Thank you, John and Laura. Excellent presentation. We've got several questions that have come in, but I see some are putting in the chat box, but please put it in the Q&A box so that we can see it easily. If you notice the little Q&A icon at the bottom, that's where you should enter the information. So we've got, I see the first question came in from Michael Baer, who's been a leader in ocean citizen science, among other things. He says, how critical a role do you see citizen science data playing in monitoring effects of climate change? Laura, you want to unmute your mic?
Oh, sorry. Sure. So, sorry, I am working on a computer so I can use the Zoom here. So in terms of, I'm sorry, I'm having a computer issue here at the moment. Okay, how critical a role do you see citizen science data playing in monitoring the effects of climate change? I mean, I think looking at the example that the urban heat project that John presented, and I think the growing emphasis on how we can, you know, government-wide on climate change, I mean, I don't know that I can give specifics because I just don't know right now, but I think it's a tool. I mean, given the increasing, you know, that it's a science and technology focus area and that climate change is a priority area, I think the combination of the two are likely to collide. So I see it as a valuable tool to help monitor those effects. I don't know that that's a satisfying answer, but I see it. I see the two connecting and possibilities there that I think may be increasing as time goes on.
That our Cooperative Observer Program has long been a significant climate record for our nation. In addition to other projects that collect atmospheric data. And we're also seeing a growth in projects that allow not just quantitative reports, but qualitative reports of what you're seeing and what changes are being seen. So I think there can continue to be a role for data collectors, but that role may even change over time and will continue to provide important climate data for our agency and our nation.
There's another question that Holly Cole asked, and I think this is an important one. On your Oceanize, Oceanize project, how many people do you have supporting the community from your staff? I know Andrea Wiggins, I like her phrase, you know, citizen science is free like a puppy. So how much staffing do you find with these projects? What's the time commitment? What are some of the other factors involved that new project coordinators may not have considered?
Great question. I can speak at least from some background on Oceanize. I know there's at least one FTE and there was a student who had worked on this project, and I think some other staff who had donated parts of their time in conjunction with partners like their cooperative institute, the University of Washington. You know, that's a great question. I mean, it definitely varies by project. I mean, this project's a newer one, and so it just launched, but, and again, I think that how it's going to support, or could it support stock assessments? I think those are questions that are actively being investigated, but it's a fair question in terms of, you know, how much time is needed to support these projects and continuing to support them once they're successful. I don't know that I have a universal answer because I do think it varies by project, but just looking at Oceanize alone, which is, you know, supporting massive quantities of data, both inputting into Zooniverse and then helping train any AI algorithms. I'm looking, I think it was about listed as about a half staff person's time to help support this activity, at least at the moment, but it varies by project. John, did you want to add anything there?
Nope, get unmute yourself, John.
Apologies, sorry, software's being a little slow today. No, I think you covered that quite well, Laura, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So we've got a question here from Gary Olson that's been upvoted. And this is, I think, in alignment with the Biden administration's priority area around social justice, as well as climate change. What methods are you using to increase the underserved community participation in your citizen science effort? And since this is a policy and law working group, I would say what policies are put in place, or policy priorities are put in place that would facilitate working with local communities in citizen science?
Yeah, great question, Gary. Thank you. You'll see within our strategy that we're calling out diversity, equity, and inclusion as core parts of project design and implementation to maximize the benefits of citizen science. And this is something we want all of our existing projects to be seriously looking at and finding ways. A lot of our citizen science work within our agency is actually driven by grant work and grant funding. And you'll see within a lot of the solicitations that are coming out of NOAA, a much greater impact on increasing participation of underserved communities. And I think you'll continue to see that in the future. For instance, our environmental literacy program that comes out of our office focused on community resilience, has had a much stronger focus on involving the most at-risk communities to climate change within those projects. And you've seen that within our last solicitation that came out a year ago, and we're continuing to fund projects from this year. And a number of those projects involve citizen science. And so we're really, I think, finding, and part of what we're asking those projects to do is to evaluate their findings and evaluate their best practices of how those projects, the community projects, were able to engage communities and at-risk communities in that work. So I think we're building our understanding of what works, and we're encouraging the integration of community science with communities through our grant solicitations. That's kind of, in some ways, one of the quickest ways we have to impact change.
And Laura, do you want to comment too, particularly around the fisheries communities? Because I know, having worked in a Senate office, that there can be sometimes a contentious issue between the regulatory side of NOAA and the interests of the commercial and recreational fishermen. And how do you see citizen science kind of building those bridges between the policy community, the NOAA government agency folks, and the fishing communities?
Oh, great question. I mean, I know there are some folks on the line who could also add to that. I think Julia Bird would have some great, and Ali Everly would also have some great input on that. I think I'm kind of looking at it as two questions, looking at how to, underserved communities, and then broadly, how do we integrate stakeholders into the process? So I would take them each kind of from a different angle. As we work on what I'm abbreviatingly called as the action plan, which is going to be, we have our strategy, and we've identified these goals of how can we build stakeholders, not into just data collectors, but active participants in developing projects and project questions, as well as building DEI, diversity and inclusion, into our project design. So we're kind of just at the earliest step of what are the actions, and we've laid out the goals. What actions do we plan to take so that we can actually see these goals through? We're just getting out the gate on that. So I think it's kind of an incomplete answer, but we're going to work on that with representatives from all our line offices, from fisheries to weather to satellites to oceans. We want to come at that from all different angles and make sure we're doing a comprehensive job of doing that. On the fishing front, on fishing stakeholders, commercial and recreational, I think there's a lot of different efforts in play. Some of our cooperative fisheries research can fall under the citizen science umbrella. So we're trying to work collaboratively with that program. And then just projects, I think through our South Atlantic Fishery Management Council effort, which has really built this program, not just a project, but a program that involves stakeholders, not only in the development of the program and projects, kind of seeing that through, and building stakeholders like fishermen into the process is something that is actively unfolding. And I think we're watching it with great interest. So incomplete answer, but I think those are some starting points for the questions.
Yeah, I think this is probably a very rich area that we're looking forward to hearing more from you on this as your project continues. Nancy Sheehan, University of Wisconsin-Madison, my alma mater, woohoo! And the Arboretum there has asked a long, complex question, so give me a moment while I read it. As you pointed out, there has been a steep growth of citizen science projects over the years. She is also seeing consolidation of citizen science projects under the umbrellas of NOAA, NASA, Cornell Lab of Ornithology. She's wondering what impact you see this consolidation process will have on smaller citizen science projects, like in terms of resources, but not necessarily reach, that do not have the resources that, for example, NOAA has. So, we're seeing projects like Zooniverse, for example, where it's a big consolidation that NASA has been working with them. And in NOAA, we're seeing this as well. So what is your expectations for support of these smaller projects? What are your expectations for data visualizations, data entry, reach, et cetera? And would it be harder for smaller projects then to plug in and stay competitive in the NOAA environment?
That is an outstanding question. Thank you, Nancy. I would like to focus on the word competitive. I would hope it would not be competitive, but rather be collaborative and complementary. We at NOAA have not necessarily seen a consolidation of projects, as we've had the number of projects within our agency growing, and a lot of our projects, I mentioned a lot of large national scale ones within this presentation, but a lot of our projects are actually locally based. And they're at place-based centers such as our national marine sanctuaries or national estuary and research reserves within our Sea Grant network. And there's some projects that involve about a dozen volunteers that are much smaller scale. So not all of our agency projects are large. I want to just make sure we're not giving that impression. But the hope is that each project doesn't have to take on the data visualization and the data management and the data entry and the protocol design and all of the tools from scratch, but rather, I think in an ideal world, we can find ways to leverage the work of others. And we see that in a lot of areas where there is a platform that is kind of recognized as the primary go-to, such as in the birding world with the eBirds app, or within biodiversity, we've seen this incredible growth in iNaturalist. But those tools are able to be scaled and used by smaller place-based projects, such as with iNaturalist. There's the ability to set up your own community or your own sub-project. Within our NASA project, within the Global Observer app, we see the ability to create your own team within a larger app. So you can take advantage of a larger scale infrastructure, but you can actually set it up to do small place-based projects. So I hope instead of a competition of larger projects versus smaller scale projects, there could be a way to find leverage points and find collaboration points between them. Or anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you captured that well. I think the only thing I would add, I would agree with everything you said, John. And I don't think it's the size of the national aspects, but I think an element I would focus on is also data quality, and usability, getting, if it's something you want NOAA to use for data and they're aware of it and are working with you in the development of the program, I think that's certainly an element that can help, help support a smaller program. Again, it's that usability element, but I'm thinking of one example, like the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program, which really focused on the Central California coast and was supporting some of our stock assessments and has really expanded down the coast in terms of a proven model and usability of the information. But I think coordinating with the end user early is something that could also be something to think about as well.
Wonderful. So Parker Gassett asks, I think, a really important question. There's been a lot of movement within the federal government in building policy infrastructure, from the legislation to the White House memo under a previous administration to support, provide the policy framework for supporting citizen science within agencies. What now can we do as more and more states are rolling out climate change plans, often ambitious, but with limited funding? How would your program consider working with state governments to enable citizen science monitoring strategies to meet these state goals? And is there any level of partnership? And then I'll add to that, what can the Citizen Science Association be doing and our policy working group be doing to reach out to these government folks to help build those bridges?
Wow, these are great questions from this group. So thank you. Thank you so much, Parker, and everybody for the thoughtful questions. As Laura mentioned, we did our analysis of projects this summer. We found that 100% of our projects that were interviewed were working in partnership. And I'm trying to, here it is. And 43.5% of those projects reported a partnership with state or local governments. So we're happy to see that a lot of our projects already are involving partnerships with state and local governments, but we'd love to see that increase, and especially around the area of climate and making sure that the data that NOAA is collecting and our citizen projects are working on are useful to you and can involve contributions from state governments as well. I'll go back to our environmental literacy program, granting program, which I chatted the link to recently. because I think that's a model we are actively refining that involves an emphasis on citizen science. And that project for our community resilience projects, I'll reach out the link, now has a even heavier emphasis on projects integrating local community resilience plans. And as much as possible involving the organizations, often at the state-based level, that created those plans in the project, to make sure that what our program and what NOAA is supporting is in line with the local efforts going on the ground within those communities and within those states. So I think these are huge problems that are going to require all entities at all levels to be on board and collaborating and working together. So increasing that coordination is only going to be more key than before. Or anything you want to add?
Just I'm just adding on. I think you covered it well, John. Is like, if I think about it in the fisheries sector, we, again, we have these regional action plans. So it's almost something I feel like I'd have to answer collaboratively with my climate and fisheries colleagues. So that might be a broader discussion, and I'm happy to follow up and have a broader discussion on that afterwards. So feel free.
Yeah, perhaps we should invite you to come to one of our law and policy working group meetings for more in-depth conversation around that.
Sure.
We've got a lot of great questions, so I'm trying to get through them before we close at the end of the top of the hour. Dave Jones, who comes from the private sector, so I'm excited to see private sector representation here, but he's worked closely with NOAA for many, many years and with NASA. And so he's asking, do you see a time where NOAA could provide bathymetry measuring devices to boat owners that could collect data and send it to NOAA? I know that's a long-standing question. It was being discussed at least 15 years ago when I was working with the Coastal Services Center of NOAA. And then he also asks, and I think it's also an important question, around kind of any legal and policy issues that have come up around data sharing around citizen science. And so I imagine if you've got private boat owners, commercial fisheries that are collecting bathymetry data, you could have some like intellectual property issues, for example, or privacy. So maybe you could answer both questions.
I'll take a stab at the first one. Those are great questions, Dave. First thing is, I want to know if you're familiar with a program that NOAA is involved in called Crowdsourced Bathymetry. That's a program in which, basically NOAA is a partner and is looking to other, whether it's shipping vessels, cruise vessels, individual recreational boat owners, to share those bathymetry measurements and help map the gaps, if you will, or areas that are less charted. I know through some of the data privacy issues that, they do work with some of the nodes, and in terms of the privacy, it's through the partnerships with the individual nodes that helps deal with some of those privacy issues. I will tell you firsthand, I'm not, a project manager on that program, but I'd be happy to put you in touch with the person who does work with IHO on that and might be able to answer better, in more detail some of those questions. But that effort has been a very valuable effort in helping chart, especially some coastal areas, and as well as some just general areas that are not as well mapped. So again, a partial answer to your big question, but again, I'll put the link to the chat to Crowdsourced Bathymetry as a starting point.
John, did you want to jump in on any of the legal or policy issues around data sharing in citizen science data?
I think, by the way, I just want to say, Laura, I just put the Crowdsourced Bathymetry link into the chat. So I think that's an ideal program.
Thank you.
Highlight. And yeah, the data sharing with respect to bathymetry, I think the IHO, the International Hydrological Organization, is a key partner for NOAA. And so data sharing is, I think, very program dependent. And in terms of what kind of data they're collecting and what agreements they have in place with their participants. So we have a large diversity of project types within NOAA, and working with the key partners for the particular topics they focus on, I think is often key to the data management question, but it's a key question that must always be thought of in every project design. So sorry for not being more specific there, but with what we're seeing with our different, with the great diversity of projects we have, it's somewhat project dependent.
Wonderful. Well, we're down to the last 5 minutes, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to choose. I know George has asked a great question that's gotten a lot of upvotes. Julia's been very patient with her question. So I don't know, Laura or John, one of you might be able to type in some responses rather than answering verbally. But we'll go with this last question here. You mentioned several times the importance of protecting the NOAA brand as a trusted source of data, right? The authoritative data set. To what extent does this make NOAA programs hesitant to use citizen science? And how do you address any concerns of this kind?
I'll take a first stab at that. George, that's a great question. And it's something, interestingly enough, our science advisory board had brought up. Just as we were, citizen science was gaining momentum before we even developed the strategy. And it's one of the areas that the first question comes up, well, how do you know you can use this data? Whether it's for a fishery stock assessment, whether it's for a particular modeling project, how do you know? I think there's sometimes a lack of awareness that citizen science is an academic field. It has publications, it has research behind it, in terms of best practices when applied can provide, very meaningful data to support our scientific mission. So I think they just wanted to have a way that, and this is why we actually, one of the key reasons we put that data quality goal into our NOAA citizen science strategy was how can we as an agency, through our coordination, through supporting best practices and implementation of them, ensure that when NOAA is affiliated with a citizen science project for scientific purposes, that data can be usable. I think the most we can get behind it is, what efforts can we do, broadly as an overarching coordination to ensure that data quality? But that's sort of the number one question, and that comes up. So we wanted to try to put some efforts in place that can help support, building that data quality to show what's the metadata, how did you collect it, how do you intend to use it, if somebody has questions about it, where can they get that information so that they know if they're using it for whatever its intended purpose, that it is, appropriate to be used in that way. It's a great question, and I don't know that we have the full answer for it yet, but that's the approach we're taking. And John, anything you would like to add?
I think that's a great answer, Laura.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's question today. There were some important questions around prizes and challenges, particularly in the development of low-cost sensors. I know NOAA has worked on prizes and challenges for low-cost sensor development previously, at least under the Obama administration. I also know, I think some of them took about 3 years to develop the challenge. So John and Laura, as we're closing, maybe you can type in the chat box there any comments you might have on the prizes and challenges and low-cost sensor question, or any of the other questions that have come up. With that, thank you all. I'm going to hand this off to Rihanna. We will be sending out the recording of this session, and we hope you look forward to other law and policy of the Citizen Science Association webinars coming up, and reach out at the beginning of the chat. I did put in links to how to join our group or get on our mailing list at any rate, and we would love to have others join us. Rihanna?
Great. Thanks, Leah and the Law and Policy Working Group for coordinating this, and John and Laura for sharing. This was fantastic. Just another plug for our CSI virtual event happening in May. Registration is going to be opening later this week, and if you enjoyed this webinar and these kind of back and forth conversations about great topics like this, you will find a lot of that at our CSI virtual event. I put a link to some of the event details, and also if you're not currently on any of CSA's mailing list, you can sign up there to find out more information and get the link once registration's live.
Rihanna, do you have the link for the Law and Policy Working Group's workshop on public comment and citizen science? Maybe we could add that.
We will be sending that out with event details, and there'll be a full list of all of the workshops. One of the great things about CSI Virtual is that we're including 2 workshop bundles with every ticket, and so you will have between 4 and 8 workshops that you can attend included in the ticket price. And I know that the Law and Policy Group has a great workshop that Leah might be able to share a little bit about, and John and Laura are going to be doing something with NOAA as well, and so lots of great workshops. We're excited for that and excited to share more with everybody later this week. Yes, Jennifer pointed out over 60 workshops. There's so many on great topics. And we also have over 250 posters, and the posters will be a mix of static content with interactive live sessions, lots of opportunities there. So really hope you all can join us for that.
Yeah, thank you, Rihanna, for all your help and doing a fantastic job and promoting and getting this all set up for us. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you again to Laura and John for fabulous presentations and for your outstanding leadership and work, shining a path, I think, for other organizations in this space.
Yes, thank you all.